Сподіваюсь, це були аплодисменти тим, хто зробив цей ролик, а не мені. Ви матимете ще нагоду аплодувати мені і учасникам нашої сьогоднішньої конференції. Я, Тарас Березовець, радий вітати вас на спеціальній події. Сьогодні відбувається презентація Київського безпекового форуму, 12 пунктів для зміцнення стратегічного партнерства США та України. Ніхто в світі не вклався так в українську незалежність, підтримання безпеки нашої держави,
who has invested so hard into the independence of Ukraine as the United States of America. And this was indeed true from the very first days when Ukraine announced its independence in 1991. Each and every one Ukrainian president, to a lesser to a greater degree, did feel the constant support exercised by the United States and Ukraine's aspirations to become the member of the European community and Euro-Atlantic partnership. We do remember the way situation around Ukraine changed dramatically and rapidly after the Maidan events in 2014. The Russian Federation, without announcing any war, at the demand of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, decided to invade its troops to the Ukrainian territory, and this led to a long-term, very massive conflict with bloodshed in the east of Ukraine, which continues until now. The support exercised by the United States was very tangible from the very start of this conflict. The visit of Mr. Yatsenyuk to the United States, where Mr. Yatsenyuk had the unique opportunity to meet the 44th President of the United States, Mr. Barack Obama, laid the new era of these mutual relations between the countries, which was changed during the next Republican administration under President Trump. Now, impersonalized by the 46th President Joe Biden, the United States has indeed the president who does understand the Ukraine's aspirations and know answers to many, many questions which are posed and asked by many, even though the Ukrainian so-called opposition and elite very much often try to disengage from. Whatever is happening between Washington and Kyiv cannot be called a pause. This is indeed the problem of the absence of communications, which has to be resolved now and here. And perhaps one of the objectives of the Kyiv Security Forum is to find the answer to the key question that is indeed a concern, an issue of concern to both Washington and Kyiv. What the relationships would be in future between the two countries, how we are to ascertain so that the partnership between two great peoples, the US people and the Ukrainian people, would strengthen in future. I am honored to welcome to the stage the Prime Minister of Ukraine, the constant chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum, the inspirator of this event, Mr. Yatsenyuk. You're welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, Madam Vice Speaker, dear ambassadors, your excellencies, civil society representatives, dear Ukrainians and our esteemed American partners. The United States and Ukraine are partners, are allies, and are friends. Today, we would like to present to you 12 points of strategic partnership between Ukraine and the United States of America. The President of the United States, Joseph Biden, has been very clear when he stated for the whole world in his first telephone communication with the president of the Russian imperial dictatorship country that seized a part of Ukraine, and all the way to his speech at the Munich conference of the unwavering support of the Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The US president conducted a conversation with the Ukrainian authorities and reasserted the support that the United States is exercising to Ukraine. President Zelensky, at a recent press conference with the head of the European Council, has also mentioned that Ukraine and the US are strategic partners. Both Ukrainian and American politicians, I would like to emphasize this, all political forces of pro-Ukrainian direction represented in the Parliament of Ukraine have signed this speech. Same applies to the representatives of the Democratic Party, and the co-head of the Ukrainian Congress in the Senate have signed this. I would very much like to thank all our partners of the Kyiv Security Forum, the Lviv Security Forum, the Anti-Crisis Media Center, all civic organizations and representatives, each and every signature. We are grateful for this, for supporting the joint Ukrainian-American platform on how to further develop our strategic relationship. So we do what we must. We address the US President Joseph Biden and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Ukrainian authorities, stating what needs to be done so that both Ukrainian and American people remain strong and decisive. What needs to be done to ascertain that our countries are independent and successful? What needs to be done that our countries are real friends and allies? Geographically, we seem to be far away from each other. But Ukrainians and Americans are very close to each other because we share the same problems and issues. We have to resolve challenges that our peoples meet. 200 years ago, America has fought for its independence and has built the strongest democracy in the world. 7 years ago, Ukraine defended its independence, its democracy, its sovereignty, and its citizens. Today, we face the same challenges, even though we are located at different continents. The pandemic in the world, nevertheless, we see that both the Americans and Ukrainians fight for their lives, to preserve life of each American citizen and each Ukrainian citizen. The Americans are more effective in fighting for the lives of their citizens, and we have to take the lead of their example. We need to ensure proper economic conditions to revive economy. The Americans have the problem of unemployment today. There is a problem that the citizens of the United States have jobs and job stations. But this is the same problem that we face in Ukraine now. Indeed, being employed, having wages and salaries, ensuring economic growth, and security and safety of our state. It was the Russian Federation which interfered in American elections. It is jeopardizing and threatening NATO. It starts all sorts of terrible things, starting from poisoning Navalny or poisoning of people in Salisbury. It attacks cyberspace in the United States. It is the same Russian Federation which attacked Ukraine, which annexed Crimea, and this is the very state, Russia, which is an existential threat to the Ukrainian statehood. So we have a huge number of things in common to make us both more strong, and so that our relationships are example of how people fight for democracy and success. In order to ascertain this, both American and Ukrainian politicians, diplomats, and representatives of NGO and civic society Both American and Ukrainian experts have signed these 12 points to strengthen our strategic partnership. I would like to emphasize three baseline things. What we all need to do in our bilateral relations. Point number one for Ukrainian Authority is as follows. This is continuation of the reform agenda that we started back in 2014. I remember our discussions with the then Vice President Joseph Biden about the chance of Ukraine to become finally a very strong democracy with market-oriented economy and success. And it was then when the United States supported our reforms, both from the economic and financial standpoints. Second item, this is security of Ukrainian sovereignty and statehood. This safety and security is fully supported by the American administration, starting from the lethal and non-lethal armaments that are provided to us, and implementation of all sorts of sanctions against the Russian Federation for the illegitimate annexation of Crimea and seizure of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. I would separately mark the need to support energy efficiency and safety of Ukraine and the standpoint of the United States, who are opposing the pro-Russian project Nord Stream 2. Also, we address the government of the United States of America to participate in a more effective and energetic way in the Normandy format. Back in 2014, we started in Geneva format, and the United States was part and parcel to this format. I would like to draw a Ukrainian parallel. The Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelensky, has recently stated that he is deliberating an option of a separate meeting with each and every participant of the Normandy format. I would like to give my advice to President Zelensky and say that we always support the presidential initiatives which are pro-Ukrainian, but this current initiative would hardly be effective and successful for Ukraine, because as soon as the Normandy format falls apart and personal meetings are initiated with President Putin, this is indeed what President Putin wishes. So Normandy format was started back in 2014. And 70 years before that, the Allied forces have landed in Normandy. And it was then when the path to liberate Europe was started. In the new Normandy format, where France and Germany are present, we need to see this as a path to liberate Europe from the imperialist Russian aggression. And in this format, as it was back in 1944, the United States should be present as the signatory parties to the Budapest memorandum, the British allies as the signatory party to the Budapest format, and our allies should stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine to bring back peace to Ukrainian territory at Ukrainian conditions. And the third point of key importance is, apart from the security and safety of Ukraine, this is the global security, and this means Ukraine's membership in the NATO. Back in 2008, we were clearly stated, we heard it clearly, that the doors to NATO are open for Ukraine. Now, what is only left for us is to enter these open doors, and hopefully that the new American administration, during its time in the office, would sign this plan, this map of Ukraine's accessing the NATO. This is the issue of global security, and this is the answer to the question whether a full-fledged peace in Europe is possible. Yes, it is possible if Ukraine becomes the NATO member state and the EU member state. We celebrate now Taras Shevchenko's days, and many presidents of the United States have quoted verses of Taras Shevchenko. I can only quote once again this great Ukrainian poet of ours. We also have our own founding father, the founding father of the Ukrainian state, which is independent. Fight and you will win. This touches upon both the American people and the Ukrainian people. Let God save and safeguard both the United States and Ukraine. And I know that the victory shall be on our side. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Yatsenyuk. Now, I would like to ask the hostesses to distribute this document to the participants. It is called 12 Points to Strengthen Strategic Partnership between Ukraine and the US. Thank you. Now you will have an opportunity to peruse this document containing 12 strategic points, and we are about to discuss it during this meeting. And now I will also quote from Taras Shevchenko. It is about springtime. The spring woke the black soil and covered it with flowers. And with this, I will give the floor to Deputy Chair of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Ukrainian Parliament, Ms. Olena Kondratyuk. Esteemed Chair of Kyiv Security Forum, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants of the discussion, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in the special presentation of Kyiv Security Forum that is extremely topical. It is dedicated to 12 points of strategic partnership between Ukraine and the US. Our discussion and the emergence of this document prepared by Kyiv Security Forum should be used by Ukrainian powers that be to enhance and develop further Ukrainian American strategic partnership. We should acquire the status of strategic partner, so should our relations be of strategic significance. I would like to use this opportunity to thank our American partners for their untiring support of Ukraine's independence, development of democracy, the buildup of anti-corruption infrastructure, and the formation of vibrant civil society. My separate thanks go to our American partners for successful implementation of the USAID program RADA aiming to support the parliamentary reform. 2021 is the year of the 30th anniversary of Ukraine's independence, announced and proclaimed by the Ukrainian parliament, and bilateral relations between Ukraine and the USA. So this year, I believe, should be a year of most active implementation of our strategic partnership, including interparliamentary partnership. We in Parliament can do a lot to develop interparliamentary relations and interaction that should serve as an example to the development of bilateral relations at large. It isn't enough just to join a group of interparliamentary cooperation, as some of Ukrainian MPs would do, but we should work hard to strengthen friendly relations as Richard Logan, John McCain, and Marcy Kaptur, Robert Portman, Dick Durbin, Chris Murphy, Sherrod Brown, and many others do. Today, on the eve of Ukraine's 30th anniversary of independence, I would like to announce a preparation of memorandum on strategic partnership between the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine and the US Congress. It will enhance the MOU signed back in 1995 between our two legislative authorities, but it will also describe what we need to do to strengthen this cooperation. The USA should play the key role in counteracting Russian aggression, implementation of very purposeful and stringent sanction policy until the entire territory of Ukraine is liberated. That's why we have to synchronize our effort in order to implement and extend sanctions against the Russian Federation, support sovereignty and territorial integrity of this country, ensuring the best interests of Ukraine in the process of the budget approval by both houses of Congress, countering the finalization of Nord Stream 2, and ensuring the adoption of legislation introducing sanctions against this Russian geopolitical project, which is not a business project as some would like us to think. Working to restore our sovereignty and territorial integrity, we highly appreciate bipartisan support of Ukraine in enhancing security and defense support and Ukraine's energy independence. I would like to thank our American friends for their leadership in anti-corruption effort. Corruption is a terrible disease that undermines trust of our people to the public institutions. But I'm sure that we will be able to find effective solutions that will enable us to start practical work. Because people in Ukraine demand justice. They say that corruption is problem number 2 after Russian aggression. And it is extremely important that the USA is supporting us in our fight against disinformation, Russian propaganda, and agents of its influence. It strengthens also our own confidence of what we do and helps us prevail in our fight against propaganda. And I'm sure that more active engagement of the USA in negotiations on restoring territorial integrity of Ukraine, more intensive military cooperation, actually offering Ukraine a true membership action plan with regard to NATO are very important. Now that Ukraine is not the NATO member, we should consider the feasibility of signing a separate security agreement that will guarantee our safety and security. Ukraine also needs new economic projects that can be implemented as part of interregional cooperation in the triangle Ukraine, Poland, USA, Lublin triangle with the United States of America, the 3 Cs initiative. We should be looking for some non-standard but effective formats that will open up new opportunities for interaction, for rapprochement amongst all European neighbors of Ukraine. I suggest that you share my optimism, and I would like to invite you to responsible work in enhancing our strategic partnership. Given the specifics of today, Ukraine needs both arms to fight the aggression and also vaccine to fight the pandemic. The new U.S. administration demonstrates wonderful success in applying this very effective tool of overcoming the pandemic and protecting lives and health of its countrymen and countrywomen. And we hope that the production of vaccines will be enlarged, and it will give the opportunity for the better prepared countries to support those which are in a less advantaged position. And I would like to use this opportunity to ask our American partners to take care of this assistance to Ukraine. We would appreciate this goodwill on their part in the name of our friendship and cooperation. I wish all of you health, confidence, inspiration. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm sure that our cooperation within strategic partnership will develop further. Thank you very much, Ms. Kondratyuk, for a wonderful presentation. Before we give the floor to our next guest, I would like to give you some historic information. The building of the Ukraine embassy in Washington is in Georgetown, the very center of the capital city. On the 29th of March, 1791, this building was called Forest Mobley, and it was there that the agreement between George Washington and 19 landowners was signed. So those were the lands around the Potomac River where our embassy is today. So thus they announced the establishment of our new capital city of the USA, and we will be celebrating 330 years of this historic date. It's there, in that historical building, that on the 31st of December 1992, the agreement between the Ukrainian government and that of the USA was signed for Ukraine to acquire that building. So another quote from Taras Shevchenko about that time, I would say, because so when will we have a new Washington with a new and fair law? So now I would like to give the floor to recently appointed ambassador of Ukraine to the United States of America, Oksana Markarova. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, moderator, for a wonderful presentation. Esteemed chair of the forum, dear participants, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, listeners online. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. And before my tenure as an ambassador starts, I would like to talk to you, people who care about Ukraine's fate, about Ukraine's life brief about the fate of strategic relations between Ukraine and the USA. Ukraine and the USA are strategic partners, and that's what we hear as a mantra. This partnership is based on joint, common, shared values and principles of democracy that have deep roots in the history of both our nations. And it's through these principles that we are attacked by the Russian Federation. We have discussed military aggression, hybrid warfare, and economic malevolence. So over the last 7 years, we as a country are at the front line of this fight, and we are fighting both on the contact line with the aggressor directly, the aggressor that illegally annexed the Crimea, the occupied part of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, and we are fighting for the lives and freedom of every prisoner or illegally detained persons who are indeed hostages of the Russian regime. And we are fighting inside the country for the level playing field, for access to justice, for the rule of law, for efficiency, for the ability of every countryman and countrywoman to have equal opportunities in this country. This fight of ours, in spite of a huge resistance on the part of the fifth column inside the country and on those who do not wish us well, oligarchs, vested interests, etc. But we are not only speaking about oligarchs. This fight is the most difficult. And despite this resistance, we can demonstrate some successes. It is a way of transformation for Ukraine, which is not easy, nor is it straightforward. But in Ukraine, we will always have enough reformers, political will, and bona fide businesses, civil society, that together with our international partners, including the USA, through various modes of cooperation and various programs, will be helping the government, sometimes criticizing it, in this fight. And this fight is democratic. It respects democratic institutions and principles, like fair and free elections, where people can express their political will. Indeed, the success of this fight is important not only to this country, but to the entire democratic world. And the USA is just a leader of that democratic world. Today, we hear a lot of messages from our strategic partners about their regaining the proactive global leadership in protecting democracy throughout the world. Ukraine is perhaps the best place where the USA can demonstrate this leadership by protecting democracy in this country. Why? Because Ukraine with Crimea, Ukraine with the occupied Donbas, Ukraine that is peaceful, economically prosperous, with the rule of law and strong democratic institutions, Ukraine as an EU and NATO member is just the guarantee not only for our success, but for the development and success of Europe, of the Black Sea region. So this vision that our people aspire to achieve, that is part of our constitution, together with the USA and the EU as our partners, makes it possible to implement our best desires and aspirations in all areas of our activities through enhancing cooperation based on bilateral understanding and bipartisan support, enhancement of regional security, and there is no alternative to our accessing the NATO, and we will be working in the USA, in other ally countries, for us to speed up our movement towards the NATO. That's the accelerated transformation of Ukraine into a modern, economically powerful country with the rule of law. It's economic and financial cooperation as well. And we can see lots of untapped potential here. And it is everything to do with the development of human capital, our cultural ties, our ties in education and science. And we can speak here about different formats, starting with the strategic dialogues, Commission for Strategic Partnership. They need to be actually filled with new blood, with new breath. And Ukraine has a lot to offer to our strategic partners as well, because we have faced the aggression, we are on the front line, and we have found some safeguards that can be useful to our partners, and we can be co-leaders in ensuring global and regional security and defense. It is important to mention here Ukrainian diaspora in the USA, and I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to extend our heartiest thanks to Ukrainian Americans or American Ukrainians who are our wonderful and unique resource, our best army of envoys, special envoys abroad, who are part of the American society and at the same time part of the Ukrainian society. And they are prepared to invest their effort, their time in strengthening this partnership. I agree with Mr. Yatsenyuk in that Ukraine and USA are far apart. But what brings us together is innovation, is entrepreneurial spirit, is freedom and aspiration to freedom, the willingness and preparedness to stand up for it. So while Ukrainian and American governments are starting a new day in our relations, are kicking off new formats of our cooperation, I would like to end with special thanks to all Ukrainian and American government members, members of parliament and Congress, all experts, representatives of the civil society for what they do, for their time, their energy, their effort, that are conducive to accelerating our rapprochement, our finding new formats that will be of success and of promise to both our nations. So I wish all of us fruitful discussion during the day, and I'm ready to participate in it very meaningfully.
And now we shall have the possibility and opportunity to hear the special address, video address of Charge d'Affaires Christina Queen, the one that was recorded specially for today's event. Доброго дня всім. Для мене велика честь і задоволення виступити перед вами з промовою. Як підтвердила адміністрація президента,
committed to Ukraine as one of our closest partners and friends, and we continue to work together across the full range of our extensive mutual interests. I know that all of us in this forum are dedicated to continuing to advance U.S.-Ukraine bilateral relations even further. And this forum offers a great opportunity to both to look back on what has been accomplished so far and to share ideas on next steps. I look forward to hearing your analysis and ideas for making the U.S.-Ukraine relationship the best it can be in today's circumstances. I'll focus my remarks today on the current situation and the role the United States can play working with Ukraine to advance our shared priorities of resolving the conflict in eastern Ukraine and fighting the corruption that poses a significant obstacle to inclusive economic growth and Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic integration. In addressing these priorities, President Zelensky has faced challenges. I think we can all recognize that. On the peace process, Ukraine's attempts to reinvigorate negotiations have been blocked, largely by Russian intransigence. On the fight against corruption, we have witnessed persistent attacks by vested interests who seek to undermine the independence and effectiveness of Ukraine's anti-corruption infrastructure in an effort to avoid accountability for their corrupt behavior. These vested interests have also pursued a wide-ranging disinformation campaign here in Ukraine intended to discredit the reform agenda and Ukraine's westward trajectory. Despite the challenges, I'm encouraged that some key and long-awaited reforms are advancing. Land reform is expected to be implemented this summer, for the first time creating a land market that will help unleash Ukraine's vast agricultural potential. Security service reform has passed its first reading in Parliament, and the President has recently committed to pursuing comprehensive judicial reform, a very necessary step to reduce corruption in Ukraine. Against this backdrop, I'll say a few words on our policy going forward. The basic elements of our policy on Ukraine enjoy widespread bipartisan support in Washington and have been consistent across presidential administrations of both parties. We'll continue to work with Ukraine to advance its Euro-Atlantic aspirations and build a prosperous future for all Ukrainians. Our partnership includes concrete support for the country's internal struggle to advance rule of law reforms and economic growth, as well as its broader fight against Russia's aggression in all forms. The United States has provided $4.5 billion in bilateral assistance to Ukraine since 2014. Our support will continue to play a pivotal role in advancing reforms and enhancing security. Our new leadership in Washington has been vocal and engaged in support of Ukraine. Both President Biden and Secretary Blinken recently reaffirmed our Crimea policy on the 7th anniversary of Russia's occupation of the peninsula. Secretary Blinken also took a stand against corruption through the recent 7031C designation of Ihor Kolomoisky. Secretary Blinken spoke to Foreign Minister Kuleba on February 1st, and Defense Secretary Austin spoke with Defense Minister Turan on February 19th, and we expect continued outreach between counterparts in the coming weeks. President Zelensky has recently taken concrete actions against oligarchs and agents of malign influence in Ukraine, including sanctioning a Chinese company attempting to acquire control of a sensitive technology company, sanctions against Russian-linked oligarchs, and indictments against individuals involved in financial sector corruption. We'll continue to support Ukraine in its efforts to curb malign actors, including through sanctions and legal action when appropriate. We also see an opportunity to reinvigorate our bilateral relationship through the robust use of our existing engagement mechanisms. These mechanisms include our Bilateral Strategic Partnership Commission, which is traditionally chaired by our respective foreign ministers and seeks to advance our broad bilateral agenda. Our annual bilateral defense consultations, the Defense Reform and Advisory Board, the Trade and Investment Council, our Strategic Energy Dialogue, our Non-Proliferation Working Group, and our Cybersecurity Working Group are all mechanisms that should be re-energized across the board. Last but not least, we will continue our work with Ukraine across the full spectrum of interests. To highlight just a few of our current efforts, we have been working closely with Ukraine to develop and strengthen the independent institutions that are so important to maintaining and defending accountability in any democracy. From the National Bank to anti-corruption bodies to the court system, the malign influence of vested interests cannot be curbed without strong, independent institutions. We continue our work with the Ukrainian armed forces to make progress towards Euro-Atlantic best practices. Ukraine is an active participant in joint NATO exercises, contributes to NATO missions, and was recently recognized by the alliance as an enhanced opportunities partner. We will work with the Ukrainian armed forces to improve their ability to combat Russian aggression in the east, and we work through multiple U.S. agencies to help Ukraine support its growing population of military veterans who face physical, emotional, and economic challenges as they reintegrate into civilian life. We've also worked intensively over the past year to help address the COVID-19 pandemic here in Ukraine, which has severely stressed Ukraine's limited healthcare system and the country's economy. So far, we provided nearly $50 million in COVID-related assistance, including funding directed toward health and humanitarian needs and vaccine distribution. I'll conclude by stating that despite the challenges, Ukraine and its people share our commitment to democratic government, the rule of law, and Euro-Atlantic values. Our shared values are the foundation for our continued work with President Zelensky, Prime Minister Shmyhal and his cabinet, the Ukrainian parliament, independent institutions, and civil society. And our support for Ukraine that is successfully integrated into the Euro-Atlantic community will deliver greater security and prosperity, not just for Ukraine, but for the wider region and the world. So thank you all today. It's been a pleasure to join you, and I look forward to your ideas and thoughts on Ukraine.
Отже, ми прослухали спеціальне звернення.
So we have all listened to the special address by the charge d'affaires of the United States in Ukraine, Madam Christina Quinn, and we can move on to our special discussion and discuss it in English. But we hope that you will understand it all. If no, you can see it all on our YouTube page and understand it all.
Special session, and I will very happy to host on this stage our dear guests. Valery Chaly, Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States of America in 2015-2019, Chair of Ukraine Crisis Media Center. John Herbst, Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine in 2003 and 2006, would be with us online. Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze, Chairwoman of the Parliamentary Committee on Ukraine's Integration into the European Union. I believe she will also join us online. Danila Lubkivsky, Director of the Kyiv Security Forum, ladies and gentlemen. Stephen Pfeiffer, Fellow Robert Bosch Stiftung and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine in 1998-2000, who will join us online. Oksana Sirait, co-chair of the Lviv Security Forum. Будь ласка. William Taylor, Vice President of the United States Institute of Peace and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine in 2006, 2009, and 2019, who will be with us online. And Yelizaveta Yasko, member of Ukrainian Parliament and member of the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs and the chairwoman of a subcommittee of the Interparliamentary Cooperation. Vitaly. And of course, we'll be joined by our permanent and dear friend Melinda Herring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Melinda, so great to see you again.
Wonderful to be with you. Thank you, Taras. Good afternoon, friends in Kyiv. Hello, Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, and welcome Ambassador Oksana Markarova. I love the way that sounds. We can't wait to welcome you in Washington. Before we dig into the statement that we're releasing today, Taras, let's start with the obvious.
Yeah, sure, Melinda. I believe you're hinting about so-called first phone call. It hasn't happened yet. And Ambassador Bill Taylor, why hasn't President Biden called President Zelensky yet? He's made a number of first phone calls already. Should Ukrainians be worried?
The Ukrainians should not be worried. There's a lot going on in Washington. There's a lot going on domestically. There's a lot going on internationally. President Biden has a lot of important issues on his plate, not the least of which is the U.S. economy and the U.S. fight against the COVID disease. He's doing a focused job. But as you've mentioned, the reason I say that Ukrainians should not be worried is that he's made a statement. President Biden has made a statement about Ukraine. Secretary of State Tony Blinken has made a statement about Ukraine. The Minister of Defense and the Secretary of Defense have gotten together on the phone, as well as the Secretary of State and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. this is what normally happens. This is a good relationship, a solid relationship between two strong partners, and that doesn't depend on any particular phone call. Phone calls, Ukraine and the United States have a bad history with phone calls. Let's remember, be careful what you wish for on these phone calls. It'll happen. But more importantly is the relationships that we're building up. And Ambassador Markarova, I echo Melinda's comments. We're so looking forward to having you here. It's going to be great. And that's the way it works. That's exactly the way. I'm sure the Biden administration will reciprocate and send a similarly well-qualified ambassador out there to try to follow in Kristina Kvin's large footsteps. Kristina's doing a great job as charge, and whoever comes after her will have a very high standard to meet. So that's the way the relations ought to be, and that's what we should be confident of.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Taylor. Ivana, what advice do you have for President Zelensky as he prepares for this phone call? If you were advising him, what would you tell him to say?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to welcome everybody here and thank you for this great discussion that we are in today. I think that the most important thing that was already mentioned here during this forum is that it's important that both Ukraine and the US are functioning or should be functioning based on values. And here it's very important that President Biden gets a absolutely adequate partner in Ukraine's president and in Ukraine's administration. And that's important that President Zelensky would be ready to open and public and sincere dialogue with our American partners, and specifically with President Biden and his team that is basing his actions on deep understanding of the processes, not only internally, but globally, and also very well understands what's going on in the country. I also think that President Zelensky has to be very well aware that he's not the only counterpart for the American administration, that Ukrainian pro-European, both parliamentary and non-parliamentary opposition is also part of this partnership with the American people and American state. And I think this has to be hinted also from the Biden's administration to Ukrainian president. Also, I think President Zelensky has to be fully aware of the fact that he has to not only show some of the actions that are right now, that seemingly are right now inspired by the Biden's administration and Biden's administration's actions, but actually has to come up with a systemic vision of how Ukraine is moving to reach all the most ambitious parts of the agenda of Ukraine-American really strategic partnership. And also, I'd like to say that if President Zelensky would take upon himself this 12 points that we are going to discuss today, I think he also might want to add the 13th point to this discussion, even though the 13th maybe doesn't sound that good to many people. But I think that the idea of actually Ukraine getting the status of main partner beyond NATO, that should be also on the agenda between Ukraine and the US. And that's probably the realistic and absolutely possible goal to reach. But obviously understanding that we are simultaneously fighting two things, the war against Russia and the internal war against corruption.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ivanka. Ambassador Pfeiffer, now we'll proceed to you. Well, I'm pretty happy all our speakers are so optimistic about this phone call between President Biden and President Zelensky. It's absolutely fantastic. What advice would you have for President Biden when he talks to President Zelensky? I hope he does. What would you advise to him?
I think the comments that President Biden would make to President Zelensky would really be focused on the two challenges that Ukraine now faces. One, the conflict that Russia has inflicted on Ukraine, and then two, the continuing need by Ukraine to pursue reform. And on the first part, on Russia, my guess is that the president will have no trouble whatsoever reaffirming American support for Ukraine's sovereignty, its independence, its territorial integrity. I think he will be able to reaffirm that the kinds of support that you've seen the United States provide to Ukraine over the last 7 years since Russia seized Crimea illegally and then provoked the conflict in Donbass, that kind of support will continue and may even be bolstered. So I think that will be a very reassuring voice. Also on the question, I think there might be a discussion about what prospects might emerge for a solution to the conflict in Donbass. Things seem to be fairly frozen now. That, to my mind, is a reflection of the fact that Russia believes that continuing a simmering conflict in Donbass is a useful way to put pressure on the government in Kyiv to distract it, to destabilize it. But the question might be, are there ways that a more involved American presence might in fact push that conflict more towards a solution, which I think is very much desired both in Washington and Kyiv. On the second part on domestic reform, I think that President Biden will push President Zelensky to do the sorts of things that we've outlined in our paper in terms of bolstering the independence of institutions such as the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, moving on judicial reform, moving to contain and reduce the oversized political influence of the oligarchs, and maybe press a little bit hard on this, which I think is important. It seems to me that while Ukraine cannot by itself resolve the conflict in Donbass, that's going to depend in part on what the Russians decide and the cost-benefit calculation in the Kremlin. Ukraine can move internally. It can pursue reforms. It can fight corruption. And that's going to be a Ukraine that will be not only a better state for the Ukrainian people, but it will be a state better able to resist Russian corruption. And resist corruption and resist Russian aggression. And I do hope that President Biden would be pressing on this. And finally, I guess my last comment would be is to the extent that President Biden could hear from President Zelensky that Zelensky is committed to reform, that would be good for the relationship. Because I believe that the commitment on the Ukrainian side to build a successful, democratic, market-oriented Ukraine, one where the economy functions freely for small and medium business, one where corruption is minimized, that's going to be the kind of Ukraine that attracts American and Western interest and ensures that there's going to be continued strong Western engagement.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ambassador Pfeiffer. Okay, Taras, we've got that out of the way. Let's dive into the statement. Danilo, here's your question. Which of the 12 points in the statement is most important to strengthening the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship and why?
Dear Melinda, dear friends, before I answer this question, because you know that I'm confident that every principle, every element of that statement is of paramount importance, and for that we wrote it. So that I will dwell on this, but before I do, I would like to follow up what Arseniy Yatsenyuk said and to thank our American partners who supported the endeavor which comes from Kyiv now to write and to state this appeal to the United States and Ukraine governments and to the administrations. Definitely, I start by thanking the Atlantic Council, our good friends, sincere and true friends of Ukraine, for everything you did, for your contribution into this statement. It goes without saying that I'm overwhelmed with gratitude addressing the former ambassadors of the United States, Steve Pfeiffer, William Taylor, John Herbst, and Mary Yovanovich, an outstanding American diplomat who also they all contributed to the text and drafted it. So this is on one hand. On another hand, here in this hall, and among those who signed the statement, we see a remarkable list of Ukrainian diplomats, politicians and experts, and former Ukraine's ambassadors to the United States who supported the idea, the initiative, which was born in a very specific way. This initiative was born in our communication between the Kyiv Security Forum, and I remember that Arseniy Yatsenyuk was part of that thinking with the Lviv Security Forum. So, and it happened in December last year. At that particular moment, we thought that it might have been a good idea to have this kind of appeal, because we thought that there could have been a pause at the senior level dialogue, and we see it right now, that all our, I will say, concerns come true. So we thought that it would be reasonable to initiate the statement that would produce the substance, the ideas that could fill a possible and apparent gap which may appear at the senior level. Why am I mentioning this? You know, I share the optimism of everyone here, especially our American friends, who say that we should not be worried about the phone calls. We are not. Our dialogue and strategic partnership is much bigger than a simple phone call. But we should be worried about the trust. I'm sure that we should not question the trust if we speak about President Joe Biden. President Joe Biden is a student of Ukraine. He is our true supporter, and as you mentioned in the statement, an ardent supporter of Ukraine and our strategic partnership. From the very beginning, with all his instructions and all his steps, he underlined that the United States will continue to support Ukraine, the territorial integrity and independence and security of our nation. But definitely, we may ask President Zelensky to exercise his duties in the way that may, let me say this in such a way, to strengthen our belief that his duties and the performance of these duties and this exercise will strengthen the trust between President Biden and him. And a lot of important elements depend on this dialogue. So here, let me say that there is a peculiar and wonderful synonym for a word which is pressure. We should exercise the encouragement for the Ukrainian authorities to make their best to establish this senior dialogue between the official DC and Kyiv. And here I see a lot of interesting and important elements that should be mentioned. I follow closely what Kristen Quinn said in her address to our forum and to this distinguished audience, and I'm encouraged and inspired to see how many similar perceptions and aspirations we share in the substance of our cooperation. It means that our 12 points, they reflect the necessity, the needs of what the United States and Ukraine should do together. And among all those elements, starting from the elements that are related to the values, and ending up with the elements that are related to our efforts to control the outsized influence of the oligarchs and others, and to establishment of the rule of law and of just economic conditions here in Ukraine. Above all of that, I think there is one utmost and the most vital task, which is opened, in my opinion, by the presidency of Joe Biden. There is an important phrase, an important point in that list, that Ukraine's membership in NATO will strengthen the alliance. Ukraine's membership in NATO will contribute to the completion of the historic unification of Europe. This is an interesting and new element that we use, new language that we use. And this endeavor, our accession to NATO, will certainly influence and will certainly contribute to to the efforts to transform the relations with Russia.
Thank you, Danilo. If you,
Just
yeah.
1 minute. I'm sorry for such a long monologue. You know, I have a lot to say.
I believe Ambassador Herbst is waiting now for his response. For this time.
Yeah, he will. I mean, he will join us in a minute, and for that, I will help him with my final phrase. That here, right now, we speak about NATO membership. We speak about political consensus, both in Ukraine and the United States, to support the strategic partnership between our two nations, and we have the powers and strength to convince both two governments to do this. I thank you and sorry for taking your time.
Thank you so much, Danilo. And Ambassador Herbst, the floor is yours. Same question.
Danilo spoke so long, I forgot the question. Could you please repeat it?
I forgot the beginning.
The question was, Ambassador, the question was which out of these 12 points are the most crucial from your perspective, and which you would like to comment on, sir?
Okay. I agree with Danilo that I would not choose any single one as most important. The United States and Ukraine share great interests, which is why we have been stalwart in supporting you since Moscow began its aggression in 2014. So that statement correctly highlights the two broad issues which the United States has been working with Ukraine on. Well, you could say not just for the last 6 years or 6+ years, but for since Ukraine's independence. Our policy understands that a strong, independent, territorially secure, reform, open Ukraine is of great interest to the United States. And that Moscow, which has been pursuing revisionist policies since Mr. Putin became strongly ensconced in the Kremlin from 2003, 2004 on, represents a threat immediately to Ukraine, but eventually to us. So we have a great interest in making sure you can defend yourself from Moscow's aggression in Donbass, that you can recover Crimea, that Moscow pays a price not just in Ukraine, but elsewhere for its aggression against Ukraine. And we also have a great interest in making sure that Ukraine's transformation to a transparent, open society is successful. In other words, that the reform process in Ukraine works. So the principles in that statement address these two large issues in ways designed to make this happen.
Thank you, Ambassador Herbst.
Thank
At
you
the
so
Atlantic
much.
Council, we have something called Blitz Round. When things get a little heavy, we ask our speakers to respond to questions in 2 or 3 sentences. Let's see if our panel is up for it, Taras. I'd like really short, punchy answers because we want to make sure we give everyone a chance to participate.
Absolutely.
Ambassador Chali, we miss you in Washington. This question is for you. Biden is, of course, the 3rd president to be in office since the Revolution of Dignity. Ukraine has made major progress since then, but last year was terrible, frankly. How should Biden's administration encourage domestic reform in Ukraine? And please try to keep it to 3 sentences. I'm watching you. Go ahead, Ambassador.
Charlie.
Okay, before that, first of all, I would like to thank everybody in this distinguished audience. And frankly, it's a really pity that it's a long distance from Washington and Kyiv. It's a beautiful location, thanks Kyiv Bezpekovy Forum and Kyiv Security Forum and Arseniy Yatsenyuk for organizing that. You know, in domestic reforms, I remember 7 years ago, not in this particular building, but in another, we discussed the same things, and you are participating in that. So nothing changed, nothing changed. Reforms is a task for Ukrainians, and I believe new government and president will do their best because they told us many things, and we will help them. Very short answer. But I would like to say about another thing, about basement of these reforms, of this building. And using this great opportunity, I want to thank for all who in Kyiv, in this audience, all the excellencies, ambassadors, ministers, in our audience, among our audience, distinguished members of Ukrainian parliament, And as a minister, Griska, who did a lot for strategic partnership, and all of you made many things. But most of us deal with foreign policy. Most of us deal with United States in capacity of international relationship. Some of you did a lot of things as ministers doing reforms, and you understand, and we understand, it's not a task for 1 year or 2 years in Ukraine, that's true. But in the same time, I'll be frank with you, we see now in Ukraine there's some slowdown of these reforms. And the question why it's happened, sometimes when we ask that of our new government or current government, they answer us, you will see, we ask Joseph Biden how he can help us to be member of NATO, and how can the United States can help us to push these reforms. This is not the right way to ask. The right way to push our government from this Kyiv Security Forum initiative, and we are as Ukrainian Crisis Media Center and Lviv Security Forum, we are completely understand that we should ask our government how they will be implement all these points, 12 points that we are published now. Because these 12 points is not because of our good friendship between our countries. It's because our Ukrainians willing to push in reforms in the country. And another important things, the basement, which is the main word. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, I agree with him, he told us about main thing now. But I want to add something. Only one word, trust. Trust. If you mention something on the different levels, please be trusted partner. Implement everything you discuss and agree with your partners. That's why I want to be frank with you. I see some problem, despite my friends, ambassadors, don't see this or don't tell us about this, it's our question. I see the lack of trust on the highest level between President Zelensky and new President of the United States, Joseph Biden. And this problem that we should not avoid to answer this question, how to help them to be closer. I mean, to have a phone call, to have visits. And I think it's the wrong way to ask President Biden when you will come to Kyiv, or please come to Kyiv now on independence. Yes, I agree with that, I support, but it's not only option. We have many other options. So trust, the main thing that we should do now. If Ukraine be successful in implementing reforms, restoring and sign memorandum with IMF, not play the game with judicial reform, need to be implemented very short period. Reforming our security and defense sector, SBU, and many other things. So we should demonstrate from Kyiv our readiness for new time, for new period of our strategic partnership. And finally, thank you so much for your Atlantic Council, all of you, initiative of strategy for new president. I completely agree with many points that you mentioned in that. Melinda, thank you that you published. Melinda published a special article to support this context between presidents. We completely agree with you. And I believe that we will overcome this lack of trust on the highest level very short time. But main thing, keeping all the level of cooperation. Kristen Quinn mentioned about that, all the speakers mentioned about that. So we will do our best, and we believe that our government will take these 12 points for real implementation. Thank you
so much, Ambassador Charlie. And now let's turn back to Ukraine. Ambassador Taylor, recent Ukrainian elections have been recognized as free and fair, and the most recent transfer of presidential power was completed very smoothly. Yet Freedom House and Transparency International rate Ukraine as only partially free. What else can Ukraine do to strengthen its democratic institutions, to reflect the commitment to democratic values outlined in the first sentence of said statement? And how can US help in this?
Thank you. Let me make one small comment before I answer that question. I'd just like to remember and recognize the first foreign minister of Ukraine, who passed away on the 1st of March, Anatoly Zlenko, who made a major contribution to the good relations between the United States and Ukraine, which continue to today. I'm not sure there's any, Ambassador Charlie, I'm not sure there's a lack of trust between our two leaders. But in answer to your question about what Ukraine can do, Ukraine knows exactly what democracy is. As you say, the elections have been free and fair for with one major exception. We remember that John Herbst remembers very well. Ukraine knows what democracy is. It's got a vibrant civil society. It's got real politics. It needs to overcome some challenges, and Ambassador Pfeiffer has talked about the challenges of oligarchs that do challenge and do threaten Ukrainian democracy. And President Zelensky has taken some steps recently to address that part. So the Ukrainians know what to do to improve and strengthen their democracy, as do Americans. I mean, the Americans, we've had big challenges to our democracy. We know what we have to do. We're trying to do it. Ukraine knows what it has to do. It's trying to do it. And together we will succeed.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Taylor. Lisa Yasko, it's so nice to meet you. It's great to see an MP from Servant of the People signing this document. The first point of the statement is a strong commitment to standing against corruption. Will President Zelensky pursue Ukraine's oligarchs with new vigor if he knows that he has President Biden's strong support?
Thank you so much. And I also want to start with thanking the organizers of the Kyiv Security Forum for being a part of my life since, I think, 2011 or 12. I remember myself here very clearly what kind of conversations we had when I was also working at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. But today here as MP, I'm going to also to state my position. And I'm very happy that we have these 12 points right now, because I strongly believe that there are two things we should stress right now. The first one is that we should be very honest that all the political games that our relations of United States and Ukraine we were dragged into, they should remain in the past, and we should start the new page. And the second thing, we should be very, very focused on the needs that we currently have, the needs for cooperation. I strongly believe that it should be around the national security. National security, because let's look at the reality. What do we have? When I speak about this in the parliament with some of my colleagues, unfortunately, I may confess and disappoint you that I am quite often called as a George Soros agent, or someone who just had the tea or coffee yesterday with some Western influencers, or this is how I'm called sometimes by some of my colleagues in my own party. And I think I'm telling you this story to show that we have a problem in our society, in Ukrainian society. We have a problem in our Ukrainian media that propaganda, that Russian narratives that are so widespread right now, they're actually ruining our diplomacy sometimes efforts, and sometimes even in the heads of some of my colleagues MPs. There is no need for clear understanding that we should cooperate, we should have more closer links.
I'm so sorry. I wanted Zelensky pursue Ukraine's oligarchs with new vigor if he has President Biden's strong support? What do you think about that question?
Yeah, sure. But I started with the national security, talking exactly about that, because I believe that people, that crooks and that oligarchs who are playing against Ukraine, they really should be sanctioned. And we see very clear message in the recent weeks that the sanctions were introduced. And I believe it's just the start, and we hear from our National Security Board, we hear many different messages that is going to continue. However, we need more communication right now, and as Danilo Lubkivsky said, we should exercise more encouragement of that cooperation, because we have many, many challenges in our national security around Donbass and the platform that we currently have with the Minsk and Normandy. We should be honest, is it really working, or we should really think about something new And with the help of United States, we could really have some more success in restoring our territorial integrity. The same thing about the Crimea and a Crimean platform. As one of the co-chairs of our parliamentary group of the Crimean platform, I can say that there are many things happening. However, really want to have results. And for that, we need international support with real actions in restoring our territorial integrity. For that, I'm really thankful for United States for imposing also very clear sanctions on those who are not friends of Ukraine, let's say it this way. For us, it's very important, but let's continue all of that. And, you know, I strongly believe that we really share two very similar values that is very important for United States and for Ukraine, is our love for freedom and democracy. But there is only one difference I want to end. There is American dream that is happening, but for Ukrainian dream, we still need more encouragement to make it really happen.
Absolutely. And I think we will have this encouragement from Ambassador Piper. So, Ambassador, United States recently slapped travel sanctions on the oligarch Igor Kolomoisky and his family. Do you expect that the US government to do more on financial sanctions? Do the travel sanctions really matter? What should you recommend that the US do to help Zelensky root out Ukrainian tycoons?
I think that there will be more American action in this area. In the National Defense Authorization Act that was passed at the end of last year, there are actually provisions that, for example, will require disclosure of the beneficial owners of assets and particularly property. Right now, they're held by shell companies. And if this law is implemented forcefully, which I hope it will be, the ultimate owners of those properties are going to have to be disclosed. And we may find out a lot about how money has been moving illicitly into the United States. But I do think more broadly, when I look at the comparison between the United States and Ukraine, I hope Ukraine does more to catch up in going after Ukrainian oligarchs. It was good that Ukraine sanctioned Mr. Medvedchuk. He'd actually been sanctioned by the United States back in 2014. Mr. Firtash sits in Austria. He's been fighting an extradition to the United States now for, I think, 6 years. Is there any effort by Ukraine to bring Mr. Firtash back? Because I'm sure there are some interesting questions about how he's managed his finances. And then we've now sanctioned Mr. Kolomoisky, albeit with smaller sanctions. But I do think these are the kind of actions that do send signals to oligarchs. And I guess I would say it's a bit unfortunate that the Ukrainian oligarch who's paid the most for engaging in corrupt activities in Ukraine was Pavlo Lazarenko, and he spent years in prison in the United States. Ukraine, I think, needs to go after some of these people in a very serious way, as with Mr. Medvedchuk. That will begin to send the signal to the oligarchs that they need to abandon the outsized political influence that they exercise, and that will be good for Ukrainian democracy and also good for Ukraine's economy.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Piper. Now let's turn to foreign policy. Oksana, it's great to see you. President Zelensky recently asked why Ukraine isn't in NATO. Perhaps it was a rhetorical question. From your perspective, what can Ukraine do this year to get NATO's attention and increase its chance at NATO membership?
Thank you very much. Hello, Melinda. Hello, everyone. Absolutely great to see and to hear those fantastic reflections. And I have two answers to your questions. First answer is probably more philosophical. I believe that the process that is initiated and that we today discuss is actually already the step forward to NATO. I would like to echo what Danilo has been saying here, because I remember how this process has been initiated, and I would like to emphasize a few things. First of all, we realized from both sides, from Ukrainian and from the US sides, that the lack of the process, this is something that is very bad for politics, because politics, it's very often not about the ultimate result, but it's about the process itself. So the result in politics, it's a process in a lot of cases, and lack of the process, it's a very bad sign. And we really had an intent to facilitate, to move on this process, to open the opportunity for additional efforts in this process. And this is how we decided to start this initiative altogether. That was point number 2, that happens very, very rare, that actually I remember different iteration of this document, and usually it happens that the next iteration is usually weaker than the previous one, which was not the case with this one. Each following iteration of this document been stronger than the previous one. And at the end, I had this wow effect. And today, when I was listening to the speeches, especially to the speeches of both ambassadors, I had this fantastic feeling that finally we all together, we speak like the same languages, and it's not about words, it's not about vocabulary, it's about meaning of those words. And I was reading, for example, I was rereading this point, for example, number 11, that is here. It's just the words, it's just one paragraph. But I cannot imagine this paragraph to appear in any document, not speaking like 10 years ago, but even 3 or 5 years ago, speaking of oligarchs and oligarchic influence and protection, very straightforward words about the protection of property right. And I believe that this is the way to NATO, answering your question, because the NATO, you cannot just, sign the document and be in NATO. It's not about signing a document. It's not stepping into the door. It's a way. It's a way of hard work. It's a way of commitment. It's a way of common understanding of principles, of instruments, of different decisions that has to be taken. And from this point, I believe that the initiative like this, they are absolutely important. And also to gratitude to all people who contributed to this document, I would like to show it as an example. This is what it means when people are ready to work together and to work hard on a common result. And again, to echo this to the NATO question. It cannot happen just you cannot prepare it as a document. You can work hard from all sides to have this completed, to have it done. So I believe that NATO, yes, it's an ultimate goal, but NATO, it's also a process. And the more process we have, the more hard work in this process we have, common hard work, the closer this goal will be to us, and it's more understandable, but it will be to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oksana. Ambassador Taylor, same question. How can Ukraine this year get NATO's attention?
Ukraine has NATO's attention. There's a lot going on, as you know, between NATO and Ukraine. We talked about this earlier on, about the depth and breadth of the interactions and the assistance that NATO provides, but also the assistance that Ukraine provides to NATO. NATO has given a lot of great information to NATO nations, in particular the United States, but to all NATO nations about the conflict, the fight, the aggression in the East. NATO troops are fighting Russian troops. That is good. There's information to be gleaned from that on how the tactics work and how the equipment works and those kind of things. So there's a lot of good exchanges between NATO and Ukraine right now. The heads of state back in 2008, when I was in Kyiv and the heads of state got together. Actually, the last time that a president visited, a U.S. president visited Ukraine was in 2008. We're glad to have him there, and He went on to the Budapest summit, to the Bucharest summit. And at that summit, you will recall that all the heads of state said Ukraine and Georgia will become members. So that's there. Now, that said, let me just take the opportunity to say, and we remember from the Bucharest summit that there were European members of NATO who were not ready at the time. And some of them may still not be ready. However, there's something that we can do, that we, the United States, can do with Ukraine right now on our own without any allied support. And that is, someone mentioned it earlier this morning, major non-NATO ally status. There's a status that the United States can confer on Ukraine. It's major non-NATO allied status. And we can do that. We don't need any other approval from any other country. And so Ukraine ought to request that. And the United States, in my view, the U.S. government ought to award that status. So the answer to your question, there's a lot going on. There could be more. It will come. But there's something we can do right now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambassador Taylor. My friends, we have about 10 minutes and we've got 4 great questions. So please keep your answers nice and tight. Ivana, here's your question. There are growing concerns over the case of a Russian private war company, Wagner, whose mercenaries were to be captured by Ukrainian intelligence, but they escaped to Russia. How does the botched operation undermine confidence between Ukraine and Western allies, and what should be done to restore it?
Thank you very much, Melinda, for this particular question. Let me just start very briefly on reflecting on some of the things that have been said here today. I do not share that much of the optimism. I really think that we still have these 12 points that we came up with all together. They are very important, but I disagree that they were not possible 3 or 4 years ago, because I think 3 or 4 years ago, it wasn't only the civil society that would suggest and all the diplomats that would suggest and push on the agenda between the two states. But actually, there were a lot of internal actions within Ukraine that have been showing the pace towards the goals that we have set for ourselves since the revolution of dignity. And today we still have to fight the state infantilism that we see among our authorities, and we still have to address the non-systemic behavior of our authorities. And that's why these 12 points are so important. And that's why it's so important that we all together actually try to ensure that the authorities, both within Ukraine and in the US, but for that matter, more in Ukraine, focus on them and actually carry them out in a systemic way. And what you are asking with regard to this special operation on catching Wagner soldiers, Wagner terrorists that have been fighting also on the territory of the occupied territory of Ukraine. Unfortunately for us, this is the case that that undermines that trust that both Danilo and Valery were talking about. The lack of confidence after the revolution of dignity in our pace also towards NATO membership and towards being even admitted or being recognized as NATO aspirant country. It took us several years to kind of restore the confidence between us and the Western community, us as a state, which has its direct and clear goals with European and Euro-Atlantic integration, and really wants to move towards that direction. And what has happened with this special operation, we still do not have the answers to this question. We still, unfortunately, see very uncomfortable behavior of our authorities that are seemingly being afraid of the upcoming Bellingcat research that is going to be made public in the nearest future. So all of this, unfortunately, brings us a couple steps back in our confidence and doesn't bring us closer to NATO. So we can, nice phrases and just one sentence, nice phrases and nice declarations are very important, but they have to be based on real actions. And we have to finally, in Ukraine, substitute the 2 years of PR policies by additional years of real actions policies, including with the ability to look into difficult matters with honesty, with sincerity, and with the predominance of rule of law, which is not, unfortunately, happening today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ivanka. Now I have a question to Oksana Syroid. Ukrainian National Security Council recently imposed sanctions on Viktor Medvedchuk channels. We also heard of new efforts of President Zelensky to set up a new unit which will fight Russian disinformation. What else should be done by government? What do you think?
Thank you very much. $1 billion question, yes. But the answer, of course, first of all, the informational influence of Russia here has to be eliminated, if not then decreased as much as possible. And it's not only about conventional, but also in non-conventional media we are speaking about. Second, I would seriously consider the possibility of an opportunity for politicians who ally themselves with Russia, affiliate themselves with Russia, or stand for Russian interest, or state that Ukraine does not exist as a state, doesn't matter. So we can think about criteria, but we have to eliminate their opportunity to remain in politics through direct and indirect requirements, for example, like requirements to declare the funding that comes to their political parties. Then I would also strongly recommend and insist to regulate severely the property rights of media, and it relates I believe it would improve the quality of information that we have today in Ukraine, and responsibility, because today we blame all the journalists, but in fact this is the responsibility of the owners of the media, and we have to control them better. Then definitely we have to regulate the relations with the occupied or our relations to the occupied territories. I would say I was insisting on this for all the time in Parliament, that we have to declare them officially, or the occupied territories. That will help us to demarcate, delimitate, and identify how we should treat all that happening there, and actually how we are going to de-occupy them. Because if you don't call them occupied territories properly and impose the specific regimes on them, it will be then difficult to go back. So at least those things, I believe, would help to
Perfect.
improve.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's a great answer. Danilo, we have not forgotten you. At the beginning, Ambassador Pfeiffer was talking about the role that the Biden administration could play in trying to end the conflict in the Donbass. I'd like your thoughts on that. We know that the Russians will block the United States from the Normandy format, and establishing a Budapest format probably isn't politically feasible either. What do you suggest, sir?
Thank you, Melinda. I will try to be to have a quick, I mean, not even to respond to this question, not even briefly, but quickly. As I conclude from many policy papers that we see these days, including an outstanding paper which was done by the Atlantic Council, led by Ambassador Herbst and you, Melinda, what I conclude that we have a lot of ideas, a lot of good ideas, and related to the peaceful settlement and the Donbass and Crimean issues. But nevertheless, at some point, I think that we have to stop and to give the upcoming US diplomatic team to think over, to contemplate in silence and in full awareness of all elements they have. For this reason, if we speak about Donbas and not forgetting about the Crimea, I will suggest a few elements briefly. First of all, the institutional dimension. We all look forward to the appointment of the Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, and we look forward to having a new Ukraine team within the State Department for them to produce the policy framework of the efforts related to the security and to the peaceful settlement. Secondly, I belong to those who share the importance of fight against corruption, fight against of outsized control of oligarchs and other things. But I believe that we should not forget about the security, and security in this sense, in sense of Ukraine, is above all. Unless we win the fight against the aggressor. Speaking about the institutional dimension, we should get back to the systematic work, to the institutional work, though we should not make it bureaucratic, as we all are used to. The next step, political dimension. Definitely, we should look at the Minsk agreements, and we should establish the international verification of what was achieved and what was done. I mean, this is one of the most important tasks that we have internationally, because we have to see that Ukraine fulfilled almost all its commitments, contrary to what Russia did. But here, let me say that we should make a clear political diagnosis and see a clear picture of what we see. And we definitely should recognize the fact that the Minsk agreements, unfortunately, do not lead to the strategic peaceful solution. This is not a key. It was an important instrument, but unfortunately, the Minsk agreements cannot give us what we need, the strategic, long-lasting peace in Europe. And for that, there is another important dimension, which is strategic dimension. At some point, we should initiate the summit of allies. This is actually an idea which was suggested by the Kyiv Security Forum, and I believe that if the initiative of President Zelensky to have the Crimean platform come true, I will say that within that framework, we should combine two elements, Donbas and Crimea, and suggest that at some point we should have the summit of the allies to think how should we first how should we contain the aggressor, and then how should we go ahead with the security guarantees for Ukraine. And finally, President Joe Biden, then Vice President of the United States, addressing the Ukraine's Rada, cited the famous words of Taras Shevchenko. He said, "You will speak softly of me. Ukraine has the obligation, must have a commitment, and must have a political will to speak loudly not only about herself, but about our friends and partners like Moldova, Georgia, and Belarus." I believe that clear solution to Donbas and Crimea occupation threats that we face coincide with the strategic aim to free and to release our neighbors from the influence, impact, and aggression of the Kremlin and Mr. Putin's regime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danila. And we'll have final question for Ambassador Herbst. So, sir, point 8 in the statement focuses on Nord Stream 2. President Biden and Blinken have firmly opposed Russia's pipeline, but as we know, pipeline is more than 90% complete. What else can US and Ukrainian stakeholders do to encourage the Biden administration to implement new sanctions on Nord Stream 2? Sir?
This is a very important question. This is a very important question. As a number of our speakers pointed out, the Biden administration has a very good understanding of American interests in Ukraine, American interests in defeating Kremlin revisionism in Ukraine and elsewhere. But there is one problem, I'm sad to say. Some people in the Biden administration seem to believe that in reaching out to Germany, which is very important after the disruptions in the US-German relationship under President Trump, in reaching out to Germany, we need to take into account their strong interest in finishing Nord Stream 2. This is a dangerous and a false understanding. We do not need to let Russia complete a geopolitical project which will damage not just Ukraine, but all the nations of Eastern Europe, and will strengthen the connection between German business and a revisionist Russia. We have an interest in making sure, a great interest, the United States, Ukraine, Poland, the Eastern European countries, most of the EU, have a strong interest in making sure this project never is completed. There seems to be some effort, again, on the part of members of the Biden team to reach out to the Germans to make some sort of understanding. I spent a career watching and negotiating with Russia and noting there's an unfortunate tendency among American diplomats at times to negotiate themselves as they try and find a solution to a problem which the Kremlin has created. And we see that, for example, among Americans who don't understand the danger of Moscow's aggression in Donbass. We're seeing something similar here in connection with Americans thinking on with Germany. We've seen a number of Americans offer ideas to help reach an understanding on Nord Stream 2. We have not seen one serious German idea. So in effect, we are negotiating with ourselves instead of telling the Germans to stop Nord Stream 2 or offer a solution to the problem, which will allow Nord Stream 2 to be completed while defending clear Western and European interests in Europe. There's a simple solution to this. Some people talk about the great pipeline debate in the 1980s as an example of how to resolve this problem. That's a false example because, in fact, while the Soviets never used gas as a geopolitical weapon, Putin has multiple times done that. So he has no credibility. And Westerners who say that, we can reach a deal with Russians on this have no credibility. There is a solution as an historical example. In the 1970s, the Nixon administration was trying to push all secondary issues they saw to the side, including human rights issues, including the issues of emigration from the Soviet Union, in order to complete nuclear arrangements with the Soviet Union. Congress decided this was a bad approach, and they imposed the Jackson-Vanik sanctions. This seems to be the best way to handle this. Congress, on a bipartisan basis, passed sanctions twice, in December of 19, December of 20. It's time for the Biden administration to employ those sanctions. Or, if they really want to reach out to Germany, ask the Germans for a real idea as to how to solve this problem. Not a hydrocarbon equivalent of the Budapest memorandum, which is what we're hearing from Berlin right now. That's the solution.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And our panel discussion is finished. At this point, I would like to thank all our today's panelists, Ambassador John Herbst, Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze, Danilo Lubkivsky, Stephen Pfeiffer, Oksana Syrait, Valery Charley, and Lisa Yasko. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, of course, to Melinda Herring, my dear friend and my partner. Melinda.
I would like to thank Danilo for his leadership. This statement would not have happened without him. He was so persistent. Danilo, it's always a pleasure to work with you and your team. This is not the last conversation on U.S.-Ukrainian relations. We need more time. There's so many more issues to discuss. We really enjoyed it. We look forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melinda, and thank you so much all. And now it's time for concluding remarks for Arseniy Yatsenyuk. Thank you, all our panelists. You can applaud. Thank you. Thank you. Дякую. Дякую.
First of all, let me thank you to our distinguished panelists, Ambassador Herbst, Ambassador Taylor, Ambassador Pfeiffer, Congresswoman Yasko, Congresswoman Klimpush-Tsintsadze, Danilo Lubkivsky, just very smart, our Ambassador Charlie, Taras Berezovets, and special thanks to all co-sponsors of these 12 points of strategic partnership between Ukraine and the United States. It is a kind of 12 political commandments. We know what to do on both sides. I wish all success to the United States of America. President Biden is facing tremendous challenges. You need to heal the American nation, and you will succeed in this. You need to restore your global leadership, and I am sure you're going to do it. We need to heal Ukrainian nation too. We need to make Ukrainians and Ukraine stronger. And it's up to us, up to our governments and presidents. What is needed? Political will and guts. It's time to act. We know what to do, and we know how to achieve it, and we're going to achieve it. Thanks to all of you folks. Really, I wish you all the best. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Arseniy Yatsenyuk. Thank you. And thank you all to all our participants, both in Ukraine and the United States. And this is the end of our today's panel discussion. We'll be happy to see you soon. See you. Thank you.